Hello there. I am just making a little video reflecting on something I saw as a young child in Chatham Township with my father, James M DuPont, who became a rather noted meteorite collector, and my brother, Richard DuPont, who is K2CYT and W2DEO amateur radio operator. We were burning a stump out. I think it was an apple tree. And we looked up and we saw a red object that probably looked like a third of an inch at maybe 24 inches away. And it was tumbling. It started that we noticed it when it was dull red, and it got to a cherry red, and then it went dull again as it skipped out of the atmosphere, and then you couldn't see it anymore. There were no sparks, there were no trails that I can remember. It was a very dull red color when it started, but you could see it rotating. You could see pot marks in it. I did some calculations on that based on the fact that it was probably at about 70 miles up and just starting to get heated up. And if that was the case, this thing was probably about a mile in diameter as it tumbled. Now that's significant because we've been hearing about all these close calls of things that would have done total damage to the Earth, things that pass between, let's say, the Earth and the Moon. So 100,000 miles away, and they never even hit the atmosphere. This thing hit the atmosphere. It had a roll to it. Whether that was what it was doing in space, probably. I don't think the atmosphere caused it to spin up, because otherwise then it would be going faster and faster as it hit the atmosphere. So it was probably in a normal tumble mode as it hit the atmosphere, and I could see pock marks on it, unaided eye, no telescopes, no nothing. Now I did some rough calculations. I used Google Earth, and I remember more or less what it looked like relative to Meyersville Road in Chatham Township, where we saw this thing. And based upon my recollection of the angle of this thing as it came across the sky, I would have to say that this thing was going pretty much due east, roughly 90, a little around, according to the Google Earth mark that I made, probably about 90 degrees, very close to 90, 91 maybe, I don't know. But what I'm getting at, that would have taken it over Long Island. Now, there's been some incidences, I don't have it right in front of me, I think they're talking like maybe 1966, 1970, where they saw a red object going across the sky. But people were saying that it had streamers, it turned green, did all these different colors and stuff. This is very simple. It was just, I guess you couldn't see it till you got red enough to actually observe it, and then you followed it as it got brighter and brighter red, and then finally it skipped out of the atmosphere. So it was definitely a close call. It definitely would have gone down the coast of Long Island. It was seen, supposedly, the one that I heard described that could possibly be this, maybe in down in Maryland. It just had too many variations of what people saw. But this thing was red. I've seen some recollections at the turn of the century, some very red objects going by fairly slowly. This didn't look like it was really going fast, obviously. And it was going fast enough to skip out. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'd really like to find out if anybody else saw that. I'm 68 years old. I would say I really can't pin it down. It could have been late 50s, early 60s. We were living in Chatham. We moved out of Chatham in 67, 66. I finished my high school at Chatham Township. We were living in Watchung at that time. So obviously, class of 67, it had to be before 66. And I would think, when I'm thinking of that apple tree, it might have been in the late 50s. that this took place. So I'm going to keep on looking at the old newspaper um, searches to see what people have seen. And it's, the problem with you put red mercury, they think it's a car. So, when you're doing searches. So obviously I'm not interested in red mercury cars. But this thing was close enough. And it was only in sight for, I don't know, maybe 5-10 seconds, if that. So obviously a limited amount of people saw it. It wasn't super bright. There were no trails coming off it, no sparks, no, pyrotechnic display that most of these people claim they see. And there's a thing called meteorites and meteorite showers. You see all these streaks of light going by, whip, whip, whip. But this was not. This was just a slow tumbling like that as it went through the atmosphere. And like I said, you can see the pock marks. So I was doing some calculations on determining angles. They have some programs where you can actually get some perspective as to how big something had to be if you saw it at a certain angle. And I was able to pick up an angle based upon what I recall seeing this object, which would have been, if I'm seeing an object, let's say 1/3 of an inch thick, I'm perceiving that 1/3 of an inch at say 24 inches, then you can do some rough calculations. So that's a rough calculation. We're talking about 5,000 feet, 5,280 feet is a mile. So this thing had to come in. Would have been something else, let me tell you. Big by any type of meteorite standards. So that's all I have. If anybody knows of any close calls, if there's any tracking of this thing, back in the late 50s, no one cared and there weren't too many people out. It had to be, it wasn't cold. We were outside sitting on like lawn chairs as we burned this thing. So it had to be into the summer, no later than the fall. It wasn't winter. And as I recall, that apple tree definitely was out of there 2 or 3 years before we moved. I'm pretty sure of that. My dad loved to burn out stumps. So, any help you can give me, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello, I decided to talk to you tonight about a observation I made when I was a kid. I'm sending this information to the American Meteor Society. And this took place in Chatham, New Jersey at 77 Meyersville Road. I'm 63 now, and I might have been, it's hard to say, 8, 10 years old. I don't know, maybe 12 at most, but somewhere in that region. And what it was, my father, James M DuPont, and my brother, James Richard DuPont, and I were burning out a stump at night. It was an apple tree, as I recall. And we were sitting there watching the glow of the stump. And suddenly, we saw this roundish object overhead. And I would say it looked about the size of a pea at maybe, I don't know, 12, 14, 16, 18 inches away. It's kind of hard to say, but it was big enough so that you could actually see it tumbling. You could see marks on it. You could see that the shape was relatively round and that there were irregular things on the surface. And it was tumbling maybe 1 revolution a second. It probably, it went from a dull red to a cherry red and then dull red. In the course of a couple of seconds, it passed about 30 degrees of angle in the sky, I would say, between the first time we saw it as a dull red until it faded away. If I had to guess at this point, knowing that Meyersville Road went east and west, I think, pretty close to it, it probably came from the northeast and probably disappeared towards the southwest. That would make sense. It was a very amazing thing, and when you realize that apparently these meteorites, start burning up at, I was just reading anywhere between 50 and 75 miles up. This definitely was not burning up. This was just touching the upper atmosphere. There were nothing trailing. There was no sparks, no white lights. It wasn't like a shooting star. This thing was just glancing over the top of the upper atmosphere, and to the point where it was just starting to warm up on the surface. It, like I said, it started at a dull red, went to a cherry red, and then ultimately went back to a dull red. And I've tried looking up close encounters back then. I haven't found anything. I wish I could set the date better. I think it might have been, it's hard to say. I have to reflect on that. I'm trying to think what kind of car my dad had at the time this took place. And well, all three of us saw it, and it was very, very impressive. And you can imagine if that thing actually came in and actually slowed down and dropped into our atmosphere. Obviously, a lot of it would have burned up, but the crater something of that size would have made, I think it would have been pretty remarkable. And so maybe some of you physicists out there can kind of guesstimate how big this thing was that we saw based upon this observation. It happened. It's totally real. Nothing extraterrestrial about it other than the fact that it was just passing by, thank God. And I don't recall anything written up about it in the newspaper. So maybe someone else can add to this. All right. Have a good one. Let's hope you don't get hit by something big. Bye-bye.